My name is Andy Rivenes. I'm a product manager for Database In-Memory, and today we're doing the Database In-Memory Office Hours, and we're going to talk about the new LiveLabs that we have out, and so I'm pretty excited about that. It's taken quite a bit of effort to update the previous version, so we're going to kind of go over that. A little bit of housekeeping. You've obviously figured out the landing page for the office hours, but don't let me forget, I want to make sure that if you want to look at some of our past sessions, if you just scroll down on that page, there's a whole list of all the previous sessions we've done. And then there's some resources. So the blog, and with that, our resources page, links to other things about Database In-Memory. So you can always email me if you have a question. I'll put my email address up, but if you do have things you want to see, there are links there along with our previous AskTOM Office Hours sessions. So with that, a little bit of housework, I think we'll go ahead and get started. My name's Andy Rivenes. My Twitter handle, if you want to follow me, the In-Memory guy, and then my email address, and I will post these slides on GitHub, which I've been doing, and I realized I don't think I have a link to that, and so I will fix that as well. I realized that as I was thinking about it last night. But if you want to go back and peruse, really the hardest part of, I think, the LiveLabs is the navigating the cloud environment. Once you get the LiveLab environment set up with the, we do it through a no VNC window, as you'll see. Once you're in, then it's actually pretty easy, I think, to navigate. But sometimes the LiveLabs portion of it can be a little daunting to get through. You do need to have an Oracle.com account, and you don't have to have a cloud account. And we don't run on the free cloud because Database In-Memory requires more memory. So as I'll show you, you can just fire up a sandbox and go ahead and make use of the LiveLab. Can we have the URL for the OCI account free tier? Well, I'll show you that was one of the questions from Richmond. I'll show you how to get started in LiveLabs, and there'll be a pointer to that, so I'll get to that. But again, we don't run on the free tier, so because we require more memory than the free tier has available to it. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So anyways, so that's that. I got the LiveLabs folks to create a special URL that's much simpler to, I think, to navigate to. So that bit.ly will get you directly to the LiveLabs, our Database In-Memory LiveLabs. I'm going to show you in a second the main LiveLabs page, because there are lots of other LiveLabs that you can do as well. And but for us, that's the one currently that we have. I probably will add some other labs in addition to the kind of the intro or basic lab that we've got out there currently, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And the LiveLabs advertising page, but I think that URL is where you can kind of get to land, and then from there you can go and do the free lab, or free tier, but I'll show you that in a second. I wanted to just kind of go through this. So the main LiveLabs page is this URL. And again, I will post these slides, but I'll start there, and that's what it looks like. And I'm not going to go through the rest of the pages at this point. I'll go, we're just going to go do it because it's just simple to do. But I did create a bunch of pages that kind of go through that, and we'll skip down in a minute. I'll skip down and show you some caveats I want to talk about with the lab itself. Again, this is more housekeeping, and so bear with me for a minute, and we'll kind of try to walk you through that so it makes sense. And we're going to flip over to the main page. So if you do the URL or just search on Google for Oracle LIveLabs, you're going to land here. This is a newer page than what we did. We did a LiveLabs session for the previous version about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. It's on the AskTOM Office Hours page. So they've revamped LiveLabs, and so this is what it looks like now. And you can search for in-memory or boost analytics, or, which I think is simpler, you can just use that new URL that I had them create for us. And I'm going to flip over to that next. and you will wind up on this page. So this is the Database In-Memory LiveLabs page. I've replaced the older version with this newer version. I'll talk a little bit about that. This is what we used at CloudWorld. So this is the brand new version of Database In-Memory. Notice that if you see in the outline here, the first part of it is all essentially what we had before. What I did was I added, other than upgrading to Oracle Database 21c, I made a couple of changes to the base labs. Then I added a JSON lab, both 19c, and actually it's from 12.2 to 19c. And then I added a lab or a portion of it for 21c that shows how Database In-Memory works with the new JSON data type. And so that's one additional lab that's now available. And then I added Automatic In-Memory Lab. We've done several AskTOM Office Hours sessions on Automatic In-Memory. And up through 19c, Automatic In-Memory had a medium and a low level. And then in 21c, we introduced a high level. We've talked a little bit about that. And so what I've done now is I've added that high level in as a lab, so you can actually see how it runs. One of the interesting things about the high level is that it sets all of the objects to be eligible for in-memory as opposed to only the ones that have been previously enabled. So now you can literally, with Automatic In-Memory, starting in 21c, and then obviously it'll be available in 23c as well, you don't have to try to figure out what objects to populate in the column store. The database will take care of that for you. We use under the covers essentially usage statistics similar to what we have in heat map to determine what objects to populate based on usage. And then as the column store fills, we'll evict less popular objects, if there are some, and promote more popular objects and try to maximize the ability or the benefit of Database In-Memory, or the amount of memory that has been allocated to the column store. So that's a mouthful. But anyway, so those are two new labs that weren't previously available. And I made some other changes that I'll go over a little bit. I'm not going to go through the whole lab. That would take much too long. My goal here was to kind of navigate you through the setup of it, and then kind of just describe some of the changes to it, and then you can go do this for yourself. So basically now, once you land here, you can say start. And here's where you don't have to have your own tenancy. You could run on your own tenancy, but it won't run on the free account. So what you can do is just say run on the LiveLabs sandbox. And so that's what we'll do. The only caveat is you do have to have an Oracle.com account, because you have to be able to sign in. I've already signed in, if you notice up here in the upper right corner. But then you click on run the LiveLabs sandbox. This works. Great. So this is the next screen you'll get. Again, I have all of these in the PowerPoint presentation. I thought it'd be easier just to do it live. We'll see how that goes. The big thing here is you don't really need to worry about the SSH key, because we're going to run in a no VNC environment, so that it basically comes up through a browser. So you only have to have a browser available, which is much more convenient. So all you have to do is click I consent, and then submit the reservation. And actually, I probably shouldn't even have submitted it, but I already have done this. And so I'm going to cheat and just go ahead. What's going to happen here is it says pending creation. And then if you go into your reservations, my reservations for me, for you, for your ID, your Oracle.com ID, you got the same page, and it'll update this as it goes. And so it'll count down. It really takes less than 10 minutes to allocate a new environment. So that's really what we're doing under the covers, is we're allocating a new environment so that you can run the LiveLab. So once it's created it, which it did here, because I submitted this, as you can see, this morning about 45 minutes ago, so that it would all be ready to go. And you just hit launch workshop. And so that seems to be pretty simple. So what you'll see then is the introduction to the workshop. And so this is the workbook, if you will, that you'll use. But the nice thing is, once we launch into the environment, you'll get both screen that you can run the lab in, and you'll get the same environment here. So depending on, I guess, whether the text is big enough, you don't necessarily have to switch between two browsers. So notice also it'll say the time remaining. So you get quite a bit of time, 5 hours roughly, to run the workshop, and then you can extend it. It'll, when it gets close to the time, you'll get an email and it'll tell you about it. It will allow you to extend it. So you have plenty of time to experiment, and it is your own environment. So even if you want to go off the reservation and do other things with it, you're not going to screw anybody else up. It's 21C, and it's got enough memory to run database in memory, so you can certainly go experiment as well. So the next big thing is this view login info. So if you click in the upper left corner, this screen, then we're going to launch our remote desktop. And so that's just some information, but to be honest, all I ever do is just click on this. And this is really gets us then into the lab. So we've just gone through all of the overhead or the steps that you need to get to this point to launch the desktop. And so we'll go ahead and do that. And notice now it comes up in a no VNC environment. And notice it's a little bit different than in the generic introduction getting started lab, because what we're going to give you then is the workbook, the same one we just saw earlier, where you can just follow along then, and then the LiveLabs SSH session, if you will. You're in Linux there, and since we're running essentially SQL Plus to do most of these, do all the scripts, you have that environment. So then typically you might make this a full screen. I'm not going to do that so I can see everything, but I'm on the environment. So now, realistically, the lab one, you can go through the introduction and the getting started, but at this point, lab one, initializing the environment, is where you can get started. You can look through the videos. Each of the labs has a video, this one up here, that'll go through, in case you get stuck, it'll just go through all the steps. There's no talking, it'll just go through the steps so you can kind of see maybe if you missed something, what you should have done. You can go back and do it or restart up again. And so what I'm going to do is come down, and what I usually do is I just enable or expand all the tasks. So the gist of the initializing the environment is that we're using essentially a generic virtual image. And so there's two CDBs running because this lab gets used by other folks. And fortunately, all of the database schema, objects, scripts, or not scripts, but objects are already done. So you don't have to import anything like we did in the previous lab. It's very fast to get started, but there are a few housekeeping things that you need to go through. I'll just go through them quickly so we can get started. But and one of the things I want to point out, so you can easily copy and paste the commands. But notice when you paste a command, this is the same as it was in the 19C in this no VNC environment. The last command gets stuck, if you notice. So the tip is you got to hit a final enter. And I used to just do a Q because I don't really need to see all the processes. Again, we're running a generic, so it's going to list a bazillion pages of all the background processes. All we can see is that we know that we have CDB1 running, so we're good. You could probably skip that. I've never seen a problem with that. Notice I'm going to scroll down to the next step. See, the generic has SQL Developer, but we're using SQL Plus and SSH or a Linux shell. So then the key one though is initializing the environment for in memory, which is going to bring the scripts, set up things correctly. So copy, paste, hit enter, and now you notice it dumps us into our lab environment where we have all of our labs. So that's really the key takeaway here. Again, I'm just going to go through this part only so that we can kind of look at everything set up. I'm not going to run through the full lab though, so don't worry. We're not going to have to spend time on all of it. I will let you do that at your leisure so you can go through and explore how all this works. But I do want to point this out, these steps. to make sure that you get through this, because it won't work otherwise. And so then what we wind up doing is stopping CDB2 and restarting the database CDB1 so that we have the correct environment. And then you can do a PS to make sure that now we just have CDB1 running. And with that, the one thing when we need to enable our environment for in-memory, so it sets up the proper directory structures. Notice it cleared the screen, tells you a little bit about what you've got here. Again, we are running on 21C for this. Actually, I should point that out, that all the base labs, other than part of the JSON lab, which shows you the JSON data type 21C, and the AIM lab, which in this case is going to show you how AIM high works. Those are the only things that require 21C. Everything else in the lab runs the same as if you were on 19C. So everything's included. So the only 21C portions currently, now we're going to expand this and show you some other things in the future. But for now, all of the other labs are very similar to what we did in 19C, but they all run 19C, so, even though we're running on 21C. So just kind of a caveat there. So then we're going to go ahead and do this. So we also need to set the environment in the database properly to run the lab. Now, most of these, realistically, the only real parameters needed are setting in-memory underscore size parameter. I've got a whole bunch of other parameters that are going to set the SGA size and the in-memory size, things so that we can run in memory and so that it'll be deterministic, especially in some of the labs like the AIM lab. If I don't set all this stuff properly, it won't repeat exactly. And the reason is because AIM and some of the other, that's mainly just for the AIM lab currently, they're event driven. And so depending on your workload, you'll get different results based on that workload. And so I wanted it to be set through so that you would see the same results each time. And so in order to do that, I had to play around with some things in the database to get that to work. But again, as we've said in our past sessions, all you really have to do is set in-memory underscore size parameter, allocate the column store in the SGA. That enables database in memory, and then you just alter tables, partitions, subpartitions, serialized views for in-memory. We populate that asynchronously in the background, and away you go. So again, this is for the lab environment, and then you can look at this, just make sure it ran properly. We're going to show you the results of all the commands that you're running, and then we're just going to restart the database for all of that to take effect. Again, just a copy and a paste with an enter, and it's going to go do its thing, and we're almost done. So then it opened up again. Remember, you see the in-memory area. We'll talk a little bit about that. So we allocated that. And this lab continues just like we did previously and what we've done in our hands-on labs. We're going to populate all the objects both in the column store and in the buffer cache in the keep pool, so that when you run your queries and the joins and aggregations, you're actually comparing row-based memory in the buffer cache, table fully cached, to the column store fully populated in columnar format. And you're going to see then an apples to apples comparison. So that's why some of these changes have been made for this lab. Normally you wouldn't need to do that in your normal environments. So, and then if you get stuck, there is an appendix to help you, and that's lab 1. So last part, or the last setup part, is lab 2. We're going to set up the column store, and I'll talk a little bit about that. There's no reason. I tried to set these labs up so that they were fairly independent. There are some caveats. In other words, you really need to run lab 1. You need to get an environment, run lab 1 and lab 2. Then each of the other subsequent labs can all be run independently. They don't depend on each other. So that's kind of nice if you want to just run portions of the lab. And as I add more labs, we'll continue that framework all the way through. We'll reset our environment, even though we have it. So we haven't gotten out, but we're good to go there. Let's go ahead and connect to the database, and let's set our SQL Plus environment so we can see the results of our commands. I may have to make this window bigger, but for now, this will be fine. And so then you see the results of that. So this is the step that we will eliminate this. Unfortunately, when we created the image, inadvertently, all of the normal SSB objects got left populated. And so I really want you to see the process of allocating, populating the objects into the column store. So we run this step so that you start clean. And it's just unfortunate. We will be fixing it so that you won't have to run this step. That's all this is about. It just literally got left over. However, I will point out, notice one of the changes that's been made in the lab is the line order table is now partitioned. It's partitioned on year. And so I did that for several reasons, but the main one was for as I add the automatic data optimization lab, we'll be able to then evict the older partitions and have just the newer partitions in the column store. So there are some other benefits that go through as we go through the different labs, or as you go through the labs, you'll see the ability for Oracle to leverage partitioning. But that is a difference in this new lab as opposed to the old lab where the line order table was one large single table. So we've now basically we've made the environment clean, and then we get started on showing the environment, or really the lab, if you will. And so I'm going to stop here, but I'll talk just briefly about this. So this is what we set up. Notice the keep cache has been created. This is just like we did in the previous version. And the reason we do that is so that when we populate the tables in the column store, they go in the buffer cache as well, so that we're going to get an apples to apples comparison. I turn on heat map. If you've enabled database in memory, and the last LiveLabs or AskTOM session we did on heat maps. If you want to go back and look at heat map, I do this so that we can leverage some of the other features of database in memory. So since this is a lab that will get expanded and have more options available to it as time goes on, the heat map is set. So just a kind of a best practice. It uses almost no overhead to keep track of that information. AIM uses that under the covers. It doesn't have to have heat map on, but it makes it so that you can then even go query your busiest objects. So I kind of, as a best practice, have added enabling heat map both for customers that have database in memory and actually customers that have advanced compression as well. So kind of a best practice there. And then the in-memory size parameter, which is really the only thing you have to do other than allocating enough memory in the SGA target to accommodate it. So we've talked about all those things before. If you have questions, we have blog posts and previous AskTOM Office Hours sessions where we've demoed all of these. But then we've really kind of gotten started on the lab. And so what the lab here will do is we finish up going through all of that, which I'm going to break out a little bit here. And hopefully you can see on the screen okay, but I'm going to make this just a touch bigger. And if not for you guys, for me. And there we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go a little bit outside and show you a little bit more about what's going on in the lab. You have the directions to follow in the workbook here, or in your previous, if you want to go back to the previous screen and see it in the full HTML version. But basically it's going to go through and run through the setup lab, talking about how to identify if anything's populating the column store and populating tables. I'm not going to actually go through that. I might show you one script just as a tip that you can just run scripts as opposed to copying and pasting all of the SQL statements. And then querying the in-memory column store, joins and aggregation, JSON, and you can just either step through them or you can go through these in any order you like. And so they even though they run or meant to run end to end, they can be run out of order in the lab once you've gone through lab 1 and 2. And then actually I'll just switch over just to show you that. You can always use this prerequisites section to tell you that's generic, but so it's really these two are for our purposes. But getting started, initializing the environment, and setting up the in-memory column store. And so each of these labs then can be run end-to-end separately if you choose to do that, or you can run it in order. And so what I was going to do, though, is we're currently in the setup. And what that lab does is, and we've seen this, you've seen this before, if you want to go back to some previous Ask Tom sessions, we're going to show you the usage, altering the objects for the line order table in memory. I did add one new script and feature, something called the populate wait API. So many times customers will want to not run their applications until all their objects are populated, simply because you don't want to kick off a bunch of analytic queries. And if you're depending on the column store to provide very fast response time, to not have those objects populated. And so the populate wait script, it's basically a PL SQL API call. Actually, I can just show it to you since we're talking about it. And what it does is it calls DBMS in-memory admin populate wait. So programmatically, through PL SQL or SQL, you can actually determine, have all of the objects that I'm interested in been populated? And if not, I can wait until that occurs. And then you might want to, at that point, enable a service so that the application tier can then access the in-memory column store through a service, or maybe you wait and to start up your application servers. However that works for your environment, the point of that is that you can now more easily programmatically determine, have the objects that I'm interested in been populated in the column store. So I added that to show how to do that and in the lab. Other than that, it's basically the same, but I will show you a couple of things just as that are different in 21C in the lab. And so now when you query the IM usage, you see we have nothing currently populated. And what I can do without going through actually populating the IM attributes, and again, all of this is in the workbook, so you don't have to remember all this, but I just kind of wanted to point out some of the differences in the lab. Notice again that our normal SSB schema and then the line order table is again partitioned based on year. I tried to name the partition so you could tell what they were about. It doesn't really affect most of the labs per se, although if you want to use parallelization, and that'll be another one of the things we do, and then partition pruning, you can see how even with all of Oracle's other database features, Database In-Memory usually leverages them, or at least takes advantage of them, and doesn't prevent you from using Database In-Memory. So it's kind of nice. And for some folks who have very large tables, partitioning and subpartitioning allows you to be able to populate the most current data in the column store without having to populate the entire table and requiring perhaps terabytes of column store to do that. So you can take advantage of very fast analytics on your most current data, and then older data can still be accessed, but perhaps it would be on, if you're on Exadata, it would be in Database In-Memory Flash, or maybe it'd be off of disk, and you'd access that data maybe for very large historical queries, which you probably wouldn't be as concerned of getting super fast performance as opposed to being able to run on your operational data and accessing the most current data in the column store. But not that you have to do all that, but that's kind of one of the motivations for separating out the line order table and the partitions. So I think I've talked enough about that. And then, oops. So that kind of covers this lab, the setup lab. And then there are other labs in the directory structure. Queries would be the next lab. And again, all of this is documented in here in the querying, getting started. Whoops. Querying, jumping around a little bit on you, but getting started. And notice it'll change you to that directory, and then you'll run through the lab for queries. And that lab is effectively pretty much the same. I added a few things about multiple predicates and kind of describing what we're doing in the where clause and pushing filter predicates in, and then comparing against index access to see the memory storage index. Most of that was in the previous lab, and so that's a kind of a rough 20,000 foot level view of how that works. And then we had our joins and aggregation lab, which the really cool part about that, of course, is not only can we use Bloom filters to change hash joins and scan and filter operations, but then we talk a little bit in here about vector group by, which is huge because, and we've done some labs on that, the ability to do the group by aggregations in memory and actually do the aggregation itself in addition to the joins. So that's always, I think, a fun set of labs to work on. And again, you can go through the workbook to do those labs. The next one would be JSON. Somebody's going to ask the question and I'll answer it in a second. But in JSON, and what JSON does is goes through, and I've got some blog posts, and we did do some AskTOM demos of this functionality. But the idea is that prior to 21C, you could use varchar2 or CLOBs to populate JSON data, and actually up to 32K. And I should point out, that's all right, there's too much detail, that we have extended string support set up here so that we can show you the full ability of using JSON 19C and prior. And then in 21C, we talk about the JSON data type and support for the new JSON data type that's in 21C in the column store as well. And so that's kind of a fun lab, I think. And then lastly, we have the AIM High lab, which is here. And again, the scripts or the commands take you through that in the labs. And there, what we're going to do is literally show you that when you enable AIM High, it changes all of the attributes on application level objects, basically, not sys and system, to be automatically enabled for in-memory. And then based on usage, we'll populate those objects. And I do a couple of queries in here to, excuse me, so you can see what's going on under the covers, how it works. And then when you turn it off, it all goes away. And the ability then also to pre-allocate or pre-enable objects so that they're exempt from AIM. So you can, and it wouldn't be Oracle again if we didn't give you choices, so you can manage it. And all of this is documented in the labs. I actually tried to explain quite a bit of detail in here about what's going on. So hopefully you won't be confused, and it will match up with what we've done and talked about in our previous AskTOM sessions and blog posts. But if we'll just kind of scroll down as you go through this, and then I try to, and you can actually see the results as well. But I try to explain in several areas where or what is going on, so you can kind of understand what you're seeing in the lab. I'm scrolling down. If I get to it's got to be in here somewhere. Here we go. But I talk about the automatic level, and when you have none, or when you have set to high, and what's going on as you do the lab. So anyways, I didn't want to, like I said, I didn't want to do the whole lab. I did want to show you that. So before somebody asks, you might have noticed that there are more labs in here than what are just shown in the workbook here. And so you can take that as these are additional labs that are going to get added as we move now forward. For CloudWorld, which I tried to keep it manageable within a fairly short time frame, to go through all of the labs that are available now for the in-memory lab will take quite a bit of time. So my goal is going to be to break it up into like this introduction, and then we'll have high performance options and manageability. So I'm going to have 3 or 4 labs total. If you want to play around with this, it's your environment. You can do as you wish. But I'll now release new labs with the corresponding documentation to go along with it in the future. So the point of all that is to say that I'm going to greatly expand our LiveLabs environment to encompass all of the features that we've added with Database In-Memory. At least that's my intent. And currently I have basically 15 labs already done. And so I'll start publishing those in the next few weeks. And then there'll be a few more that I'll add in addition to that. So the idea is that you should be able to experiment and see all of the features, not just the basics, but also all of the new features that have been added as we've gone through the different releases of Oracle Database with Database In-Memory. I kind of think this is a good introduction to the new LiveLabs environment, and hopefully you agree and can make use of it. And if you have comments, please feel free to let me know. I had my email address posted, so you can just feel free to ask questions if you're confused, or if you've missed, or I think I missed something. Be more than happy to fix it. It went through pretty well with the group that we had at CloudWorld, so I feel pretty comfortable that we have that it's pretty solid in the current setup. And then again, we will expand it. Hopefully, you can go ahead and reserve your own live lab and walk through what I've shown. I will post the slides on GitHub, and I'll put a link in the AskTOM page to the GitHub, because GitHub repository where I've got some from previous AskTOM Office Hours sessions. I have slides and scripts as well. So if you don't have the link, it is in the resources page on the blog, but I'll put it right in the AskTOM page as well, since I realized I hadn't done that. Let me go back to the slides for a second. Let me go. So I have all of the URL and for LiveLabs, as I mentioned, and the description of how to get there, or you can land right on the LiveLabs URL, which is also on our resources page. And then I kind of go through what I talked about in here to show you how to get through it, and the reservations and pending and all that. So I'm going to kind of just go scroll through this very quickly, because I think you need to do that. The current agenda, this is the current labs available in the Database In-Memory LiveLab. And then let me talk about, so I think I covered everything. Be sure to follow the directions to make sure you get the environment set up properly. That one script that's going to disable the tables that were left enabled in the column store, which we'll fix. And I talked about, I think, all of these things and additional information. Talked about SQL Plus and showed you the directories that are in the lab. Yeah, the big tip is let's just literally run each script rather than having to cut and paste all of the SQL. You can do either, or type it in if you really wanted to. And then our resources page. So we have the blog, which is blogs.oracle.com/in-memory. And then the DBIM resources page hangs off of that, or you can just hit that URL directly, which has the links to this LiveLab environment. Also has the GitHub link. So if you want to go look at the presentation, this presentation, you can do that. And I have a bunch of other database and memory information as well. The AskTOM, which you obviously have that URL for, but we have quite a few not only blog posts, but tech briefs, technical information about database and memory. And so hopefully there's lots of information for you to make use of database and memory and get questions answered. And if all else fails, you can always fire me an email. And hopefully it'll all work very seamlessly for you. And if not, feel free to let me know. I'm kind of excited that I was able to get this out, and in the future we'll be able to. I'm going to, as I said, add a bunch of other labs so you can experiment on your own with something that's already set up for things like in-memory expressions and join groups and ADO, automatic data optimization, all these things that we've talked about, that I've talked about, and with different guests over the last couple of years with our AskTOM Office Hours sessions, we've tried to incorporate into the LiveLabs all the way up through 21C. And so this is also a precursor to what will certainly be available in 23C, because we'll carry all that forward, plus new features that are available. If you want to go back and look at the CloudWorld sessions, I think some of the folks talked about some of the new 23C features that we've been working on. And so with that, so I do have a question. Is there any general documentation about how to use LiveLabs in general, not just for in-memory? So that would be you would go to the Go LiveLabs, that very first. So if you go back to this first LiveLabs, there is quite a bit of documentation about how to use LiveLabs and what's going on there. So if you want to run through in here, when you go to this first URL here for the generic LiveLabs, there, click on either what you're interested in, and if you scroll through there down further in the LiveLabs, there should be there's documentation that should help you get whatever questions answered that you're concerned about, because there are actually a lot of LiveLabs, not just database and memory. Of course, that's the one we're interested in, but for all sorts of other things, Apex and Rack, and whether it's database oriented or even whether it's application oriented, or the different products that Oracle supports, even the simplifying microservices. So there are a bunch of things. So hopefully that, I would suggest going there first, and that should get you into the general environment of how to work with LiveLabs. You have my email address, and if you have questions about it, or even comments, I'd be more than happy to hear them, and then I can incorporate those comments that you might have into the LiveLab as I add the new labs to it, and we kind of expand this. So I'm very much open to hearing what you had to say about it and what you think, and both good and bad, and certainly then answering any questions, or if you come up with issues. I kind of would like to focus on the live, or the Database In-Memory LiveLabs environment. If you have generic questions about LiveLabs, I can certainly put you in touch with the folks that are running LiveLabs if you are stuck and can't get the kind of information you want. So with that, thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you next time.